There are things that make a grown man stop believing he understands what courage looks like. Steve Harvey had been in television for 30 years. He had interviewed presidents. He had stood at the center of Family Feud through thousands of moments of grief, of joy, of the specific unrepeatable human quality that makes a game show into something it was not designed to be. He had been moved. He had been broken open. He had walked off stages and cried in hallways and come back with red eyes and no apology. He thought he had seen courage. He had not seen this. On a bright Thursday afternoon in June 2024, a young woman named Destiny Williams stood at the Family Feud contestant podium. She was composed. She was sharp. She had answered 3 rounds of survey questions with the focused precision of someone who did not have time in her life for imprecision and had not had time for it for years. She had won the main game. She had played fast money. She had scored high enough to win the $20,000. And then, when Steve Harvey asked her the question he asked every big winner, "What are you going to do with the money?" she had given an answer that was so specific and so plain and so completely without drama that the specificity and the plainness were themselves the most dramatic thing in the room. She was going to use it for her siblings' school supplies, winter coats, and the past due electricity bill. Steve Harvey had looked at her. He had asked, in the way a host asks things when something in an answer has made him pay a different kind of attention, "How old are your siblings, Destiny?" She had told him. 4 of them, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Steve Harvey had looked at her for a moment. Then he had asked the question he should perhaps have asked at the beginning. The question that should have been obvious from the answer she had just given, the question whose answer was going to change the temperature of the room completely. "And how old are you?" Destiny had looked at him with the level, unbothered gaze of someone who had been asked this question before and had long since stopped finding it surprising that adults needed to ask it. 16, she said. Steve Harvey went completely still. The studio audience made a sound, not a single unified sound, but a collection of individual sounds arriving at the same moment. The specific sound of 200 people understanding something at the same time that they had not understood a moment before. 16 years old. 4 siblings. 8, 10, 12, and 14. Both parents gone. The electricity bill past due. 16, Steve Harvey stood in the center of his stage and looked at this girl, 16 years old, composed, precise, entirely unbothered by the weight she had clearly been carrying for long enough that she had stopped noticing it was heavy, and for the first time in 30 years of television, he did not know what to say. He found something. He always found something. But first, he had to stand there for a moment with what he had just heard. This is Destiny's story. It begins with a loss that would have destroyed most adults. It continues with a choice that most adults would not have had the capacity to make. And it ends, or rather, it arrives at a moment, on a Thursday afternoon in June, when the world finally looked at what Destiny Williams had been doing for 2 years and understood the full measure of it. Destiny Renee Williams was born in 1 August 2007 in Memphis, Tennessee, the oldest child of Marcus and Lynette Williams. She was 16 years old at the time of the Family Feud taping. She had been 16 for less than a year when everything changed. And she had been managing the change ever since with a competence and a steadiness that the adults around her found both inspiring and quietly devastating. Because there is something in a child managing things that adults struggle with that inspires admiration and grief in equal measure. And the grief is the part that doesn't always show. Marcus Williams had worked in logistics for a distribution center outside Memphis for 9 years. He was a large man with a specific physical warmth, the kind of man whose presence filled a room not with noise but with solidity, with the quality of something reliable, something you could lean on and know it would hold. He drove Destiny to school on the mornings he didn't have an early shift. He made pancakes on Sunday, not from a box, from scratch, a recipe his own mother had given him that involved a specific ratio of buttermilk to flour that he kept in his head and had never written down because he believed some things should stay in the head. He read to the younger children in the evenings, not chapter books, actual novels. Starting with Charlotte's Web when Jalen was 4, and working through the Narnia books, and then Roald Dahl, and then whatever they asked for, his voice steady and expressive. The children arranged around him on the couch in the order of their height, which also happened to be the order of their ages. Lynette Williams had worked part-time at a daycare center and part-time at a dry cleaner's, which was the combination that made the family's finances work, not comfortably, not with any margin for significant unexpected costs, but consistently, which was its own form of wealth. She was the organizer. Marcus was the warmth and Lynette was the structure, and between them, they had built a household that was, by every important measure, functional and loving and full. She had a system for everything. The children's school things were organized the night before. Lunches were made in the morning, not the evening, because Lynette had a theory about sandwiches going stale, and she held this theory firmly. Laundry had a day and a specific order, and a place for everything clean and a place for everything to be washed, and she had taught this system to Destiny. Her oldest, over several years of working alongside her, because Lynette understood in the specific practical way of a woman who had grown up with limited resources and had learned to make limited resources go far, that the system was the thing. The system was what kept the days manageable. The system was what meant that 4 children got to school on time with their lunches and their homework and their permission slips. Destiny had absorbed the system. She had absorbed it the way children absorb things when they are paying close attention to the person demonstrating it, which was how Destiny paid attention to everything, completely, practically, retaining what was useful. She was 14 years old when she started to understand the system fully. She was 15 when she had to run it alone. Marcus died first. It was November of 2022. A car accident on a highway outside Memphis, early morning before the sun was up, on a day when he had an early shift and had left the house in the dark. He was 37 years old. The accident was not his fault. This was the information the police gave Lynette when they came to the door at 6 in the morning, and it was true and completely beside the point. Because Marcus was gone regardless of whose fault it was, and the children were in their beds, and Destiny had heard the knock at the door from her room and had come downstairs in her socks to find her mother standing in the open doorway with 2 officers and a look on her face that Destiny had never seen before and immediately understood. She had stood on the stairs. She had not gone down the rest of the way. She had not said anything. She had listened. Then she had gone back upstairs. She had stood in the hallway at the top of the stairs at the doors of her 4 siblings' rooms. She had listened to them sleeping. She had stood there for a long time. Then she had gone back to her room and sat on her bed and stayed there until the sun came up, because there was nothing to be done in the dark, and the sun was coming, and the day was going to require things from her, and she needed to be ready for it. Jalen was 8 years old. Kezia was 10. Andre was 12. Brianna was 14. They had all been asleep. They would all wake up and need breakfast and need to be told, and need to go to school or not go to school, and Destiny was 15 years old and she was the oldest, and the decision about what happened next in the next few hours was, she understood clearly and without sentimentality, substantially hers. She had let them sleep. She had gone downstairs and made breakfast. The grief counselor the school provided, in the weeks after Marcus died, would later say that Destiny Williams was the most organized 15-year-old she had ever worked with. She said it with admiration and with a specific concern that she had learned, across years of working with young people, to hold quietly. The admiration was for the competence. The concern was for what the competence was covering. Lynette had held them together in the 8 months that followed with a determination that was partly strength and partly the momentum of a woman who did not know what else to do except keep going. She had adjusted her hours, found additional work, reorganized the finances. She had been quiet in ways she had not been quiet before. She had leaned on destiny in ways that she probably would not have leaned on destiny if destiny had not been so clearly capable of bearing it, which was the specific trap of having a competent child, that their competence invited more weight. Destiny had not complained about the weight. She had simply adjusted her stance and kept carrying it. Lynette died in July of 2023. A blood clot. Sudden, at home, on a Tuesday afternoon while the children were at a summer program and Destiny was at the library doing summer reading. Destiny had come home at 3:30 and found her mother on the kitchen floor and had called 911 and had stayed on the phone with the operator until the ambulance arrived and had then called her grandmother, Lynette's mother, Frances, who lived 40 minutes away, and had said in the specific clear steady voice she had learned to use for things that could not be allowed to become hysterical, "Grandma, something happened to Mom. You need to come." She was 15 years old. She had been 15 years old for 3 weeks. Her grandmother Frances had come. Frances was 68 years old and in reasonable health and had a 2-bedroom house and a fixed income and a grief of her own that she had not finished, processing when she arrived at Destiny's door and looked at her granddaughter standing in the hallway with 4 smaller children, arranged behind her and understood, in the way of grandmothers who have been paying attention their whole lives. What had happened, and what was happening, and what was going to need to happen next. The conversations that followed with Child Protective Services, with the school district, with the lawyer who helped them understand what was legally required and legally available, were long and complicated in the specific way of systems that are designed for ordinary situations encountering an extraordinary one. Frances was assessed as a potential guardian. The house was too small. Her income was too limited. The distance from the school the children attended was a complication. The caseworker assigned to the Williams children was a woman named Patricia Booker, who had been doing this work for 14 years and who had in those 14 years developed the ability to look at a family and understand quickly what was present and what was missing and what the best available path was through a situation that was never going to have a good path, only a least bad one. She had looked at this family. She had looked at Destiny. She had found a solution that was unusual but defensible. Destiny, as the oldest, would be recognized as the primary responsible party for her siblings' day-to-day care, with Frances as the legal guardian of record and the adults at the school and at the social services office maintaining a close oversight relationship. The children would stay in the house they knew. They would stay in their school. The arrangement would be reviewed every 6 months. Patricia Booker had sat across from Destiny at the kitchen table where Lynette had organized lunches and made her system and explained all of this. She had watched Destiny listen. She had watched Destiny ask 3 precise, practical questions. She had watched Destiny nod. She had said, "Destiny, you understand this is a lot for a 15-year-old to take on." Destiny had said, "Yes, you can say no. There are other options." Destiny had looked at her. She had looked at the 4 younger faces arranged in the doorway to the kitchen, watching. She had looked at her grandmother, who was holding herself carefully together. She had said, "They're my family. They stay together. I'm the oldest. This is what the oldest does." Patricia Booker had been doing this work for 14 years. She had not cried at a case interview in 11 of them. She had driven home that evening and called her own sister. Destiny had been running the household for 11 months by the time the Family Feud taping came around. She had learned, in those 11 months, every aspect of the system Lynette had built, not just the parts she had already absorbed, but the parts she had not known existed. The bills, the insurance, the school enrollment paperwork. the grocery budget and how far it went, and what it did not cover, and what the food bank covered, and how to get to the food bank, and how to stand in line at the food bank in a way that was dignified and did not make the younger children feel diminished. She had learned which teachers to call when a child was struggling, and which ones to email. She had learned Jalen's specific fear, the dark, which required a nightlight that she bought at the dollar store and replaced when it burned out, which was something she tracked. She had learned Andre's tendency to internalize things rather than say them, and how to get him talking by asking about basketball first and letting him get to the real thing in his own time. She had learned that Brianna, 14 and closest in age to Destiny, needed to be treated as a partner in the household rather than a child being managed, and had given her specific responsibilities that were real and that Brianna took seriously. She had learned that Kezia, 10 years old and the second youngest, cried at night sometimes with the specific quietness of a child who has learned that the nighttime is when you are allowed to feel things you cannot show in the day, and that the right thing to do when you heard it was to go to the door and knock softly and come in and lie down beside her and say nothing. She had learned this because that was what Lynette had done for her. When she was small, when things were hard, knock, come in, lie down, say nothing. She had not known at the time that she was being taught. She had simply been comforted, but the lesson had stayed, the way things stay when they are demonstrated rather than spoken, and now she was on the other side of the door, and she knocked, and she came in and she lay down and said nothing, and Kezia stopped crying eventually, the way you stop crying when someone is there. The Family Feud application had been Brianna's idea. Brianna had watched the show with Destiny on a Saturday evening, one of the evenings when homework was done and Jalen was in bed, and it was just the two of them on the couch in the specific companionable quiet of two people who have been through something hard together and have stopped needing to talk about it constantly, and Brianna had said, "We should go on that show. We could win money." Destiny had looked at her. She had thought about it. She had said, "Okay." She had put in the application that night. She had not mentioned it to Francis or to Patricia Booker or to anyone else until the call came back, because she was 16 years old and she was running a household, and she had learned that the best approach to most things was to wait until they were real before spending energy on them. When the call came, she had told Francis. Francis had looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. Then she had said, "What do you need from me?" Destiny had said, "Come with us. Be on the team." Francis had come. The Williams family team was Destiny, her sister Brianna, her grandmother Frances, her aunt Lynette's younger sister Camille, who had driven from Nashville when she heard, and a woman named Mrs. Dorothy Reeves, who had been the Williams family's neighbor for 11 years, and who had, in the months since Lynette died, become a consistent presence in the way that certain neighbors become consistent presences when a family needs them, not intrusively, not with the performative generosity of someone who wants to be seen helping, but quietly, practically, specifically. Mrs. Reeves had left a meal on the porch twice a week for 11 months. She had not knocked. She had not stayed. She had left it and gone, because she understood that a 16-year-old running a household did not need the additional task of being grateful in real time to someone who was watching her be grateful. She had left the food and let it be received in private. Destiny had knocked on her door one evening in March and said, "Mrs. Reeves, I want you to come on a game show with us." Mrs. Reeves had looked at her. "All right," she had said. That was the entirety of the conversation. They had prepared the way Destiny prepared for everything, completely, methodically, without excess. She had watched 12 episodes of Family Feud and taken notes on the categories of questions. She had looked up the statistical distribution of common survey answers. She had run her team through practice rounds at the kitchen table on 3 separate evenings, with Jalen and Andre and Kezia watching from the hallway, because there was no good way to keep them entirely out of it and Destiny had decided that their presence was not a problem as long as they did not participate. Jalen had participated twice. Destiny had redirected him twice, patiently and without irritation, which was a skill she had developed. They flew to Los Angeles, Frances and Camille, and Destiny and Brianna, with Mrs. Reeves on the same flight, on a Tuesday morning. It was the first time Destiny had been on an airplane. She had sat in the window seat because Brianna had taken the middle seat and Frances was on the aisle, and Destiny had ended up at the window without exactly choosing it. She had looked out the window for the entire flight. She had not said much. Brianna had leaned over at one point and said, "You okay?" Destiny had said yes. "I'm looking at the clouds." Brianna had looked at the clouds with her. They had not said anything else for a while, which was their particular way, the way of two people who had been sharing a house through a terrible year and had learned that silence between them was not emptiness but company. They arrived at the studio the following morning. The production team was warm and professional. A segment producer sat with Destiny before the taping and went through the standard questions about the family's story, about Marcus and Lynette, about the 11 months, about what she hoped to win. Destiny answered every question directly and completely, with the specific quality of someone who had told this story enough times to know exactly what was in it and what was not. The producer asked her, near the end, "Is there anything you want people to understand? About your family, about your situation, anything you want them to take away?" Destiny had thought about this. She had looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "I want them to understand that my siblings are fine. They're okay. They go to school. They do their homework. Kezia just won a spelling bee. Jalen got an A on his math test last week, which, a brief pause, and something crossed her face that was not quite a smile but was in the same country as one. Which was a surprise to both of us, honestly, but they're fine. I need people to know they're fine." The producer had looked at her. "They're fine," the producer repeated. "Yes," Destiny said. "Because that's what I'm there for, to make sure they're fine." She paused. "And they are." "So," the producer had nodded. She had written something down. She had excused herself for a moment and made a call. The taping began an hour later. Destiny walked onto the Family Feud stage with her team, and the audience saw them. Saw Frances, who was the oldest and looked like a grandmother in the specific way of grandmothers who have been through things. Saw Camille, who had Lynette's eyes and the expression of a woman who was holding something together for the sake of someone she loved. Saw Mrs. Reeves, who stood with the particular settled composure of a woman who had been leaving food on porches for 11 months and had earned her place in this family without asking for recognition. And saw Destiny. The audience saw Destiny, and something happened in the room that was different from the usual warm reception of a new family. Something more careful, more attentive. The way a room pays attention when it senses, without being told, that it is in the presence of something it needs to understand. Steve Harvey crossed the stage and his eyes found Destiny first, and then moved to the rest of the team, and then came back to Destiny, and in that return there was the specific quality of a host who has been given information before a taping and is now seeing the information in person and is recalibrating. He greeted them all with warmth. He shook hands. He made the family feel at ease. He was exceptional at this, the genuine ease, not the performed ease, the ease of a man who actually liked people and found them interesting. Then he said, "Destiny, how old are you?" It was the first question he asked her, not the standard opening question. He had asked her specifically. Destiny looked at him. 16, she said. He nodded slowly. "And you're the oldest?" "Yes. Tell me about your team." Destiny told him. Frances was her grandmother, Lynette's mother. Camille was her aunt. Mrs. Reeves was her neighbor. Brianna was her sister, the second oldest. And the others? Steve said. You have 4 siblings total? Jalen, Kezia, Andre, and Brianna. 8, 10, 12, 14. A brief pause. Brianna's here. The others are home with a friend from church who stays with them when I'm out. When I'm out. The specific phrasing of a person for whom leaving the house required arranging coverage. The specific phrasing of someone who was, whatever the document said, whatever the legal arrangement specified, functionally the parent of 4 children. Steve Harvey heard that phrasing. He looked at her for a moment. He moved on, because this was not the moment yet. They played the first round. Destiny was extraordinary and entirely without ego about it. She answered with the instinctive practicality of someone who had been thinking about what ordinary people needed for 11 months, and had therefore become expert in what ordinary people said and thought and wanted. She hit the number 1 answer in the first face-off on a question about things you buy at a grocery store when you're in a hurry. Frozen dinners, she said before Steve Harvey finished reading the question. Number 1 answer. 41 points. Steve Harvey looked at her. You were fast. I know that one, she said. No elaboration. Brianna, beside her, gave the specific expression of a younger sibling who has watched their older sibling be competent at something and is simultaneously proud and slightly competitive about it. She hit the next face-off and scored the number 3 answer, which she received with the satisfaction of someone who is keeping score in a game that is not officially the game. Frances was patient and careful and gave the kind of answers that schoolteachers and grandmothers give, rooted deeply in common sense and in the specific knowledge of how large numbers of ordinary people actually thought about ordinary things, which turned out to be very useful at Family Feud. She hit 2 answers in the first 2 rounds that were not flashy and were correct, and kept the team consistently competitive. Mrs. Reeves answered once. She answered carefully and correctly, and with the composure of a woman who had decided that she was here for destiny, and that her job was therefore to be useful and not to be complicated. Camille was quick and spirited, and had the particular energy of someone who had been sitting in Nashville for 11 months feeling helpless, and was finally in a room where she could do something, anything for this family, and was going to do it as well as she possibly could. They won the first round. They won the second. The third was close. The other family came back and the lead narrowed to a margin that made the studio tense, and Destiny won the final face-off with an answer that was so fast and so correct that Steve Harvey paused for a beat before continuing. The question, name something a teenager is always asking for. Before Steve had finished the sentence, money, Destiny said. Number 1 answer. 47 points. They won the main game. The family embraced. Brianna grabbed Destiny around the shoulders with the force of a 14-year-old who had been watching her sister carry things all year and was completely overwhelmed by watching her win something. Frances pressed both hands to her face. Camille was crying without apology. Mrs. Reeves stood with her arms folded and her eyes closed, and the expression of a woman who had been leaving food on a porch for 11 months and was satisfied. Destiny stood in the middle of all of it with her chin slightly raised and her eyes bright, and the contained, serious quality of someone who was glad and was not yet allowing herself to be completely glad. Because fast money was next, and fast money was what mattered. The fast money round came. Destiny and Frances played together. Frances scored 88 points. The practical wisdom of a 68-year-old grandmother given game show questions turned out to be formidable. Destiny stepped to the second podium. She answered 5 questions in 17 seconds. Every answer was precise. Every answer was correct. When the board revealed her scores, number 1, number 2, number 1, number 1, number 3, the combined total was 194 points. They had won the $20,000. The studio erupted. Steve Harvey celebrated. The family came together at center stage in the particular emotional collision of people who have been through something hard together and have just won something together and are feeling both at once. And then Steve Harvey asked her what she was going to do with the money. And Destiny told him. School supplies, winter coats, the electricity bill that was 63 days past due. Steve Harvey had gone still. "How old are your siblings?" he said. She told him, 8, 10, 12, 14, and then he had asked, "How old are you?" And she had said 16. The studio made a sound, not a single unified sound. The specific collection of individual sounds that 200 people make when they understand something simultaneously that they did not understand 30 seconds before. A sound made of breath, and the small sharp intakes of breath, and one person in the left section saying "oh" quietly, and someone else saying "God," and the general murmur of a room recalibrating around new information. 16. Steve Harvey stood at the center of his stage and looked at Destiny Williams. 16 years old. Both parents gone. 4 siblings. 8, 10, 12, 14, 11 months of running a household. An electricity bill 63 days past due. School supplies. Winter coats. 16. He was quiet for a moment that was longer than the hosting rhythm usually allowed. He let it be longer. Some information requires more room than the rhythm provides. Then he said, "Destiny." "How long?" She knew what he was asking. 11 months, she said. "Since my mom. And before that, when you lost your dad, how long did it take before it was mostly on you?" She thought about this honestly. "Pretty quickly," she said. She needed help. After, so it was the 2 of us, and then mostly me. "How old were you when your dad died?" 15. A pause. November. Steve Harvey looked at her. He was not performing anything. He had moved past the hosting entirely. He said, "Tell me about your siblings." And Destiny Williams, 16 years old, in a television studio in Los Angeles, California, told Steve Harvey about her family. She told him about Jalen, 8 years old, the youngest, who was afraid of the dark and needed the dollar store nightlight, and who had asked Destiny, 2 weeks after Lynette died, whether Destiny was going to die too. She had sat with him on his bed for a long time before answering. Then she had said, "I'm going to be right here. Right in this house. Every day." And he had looked at her with the calculating assessment of an 8-year-old measuring the reliability of a promise, and then he had lain down and gone to sleep. She told him about Kezia, 10 years old, who had won the spelling bee, which was true, which had happened 3 weeks before the taping, which Destiny was still thinking about, still quietly proud of in the way she was quiet about most things. Kezia, who cried at night sometimes, and Destiny, who knocked and came in and lay down and said nothing. She told him about Andre, 12 years old, who internalized things and talked about them eventually if you asked about basketball first, who had his father's build already, the broad shoulders starting to come in, and who sometimes stood in the kitchen doorway in the mornings with an expression Destiny recognized, because it was the same expression she had seen on Marcus, the same stillness. And she would say, "Come sit down and eat," and he would come sit down and eat. She told him about Brianna, 14, almost 15, who had applied to the Family Feud, who stood behind Destiny at this moment on this stage, with the expression of someone who is watching their person be seen for the first time by a room that did not previously understand what it was looking at. She said, "Brianna thought of this, coming here. She watches the show. She said, we should go on that show and win money. And I thought, you know." "Okay," she paused. "She's smart. She's the one who says things out loud that I'm thinking." Steve Harvey looked at Brianna for a moment. Brianna looked back at him with Lynette's eyes and Marcus's steadiness. "She sounds like you," Steve said to Destiny. "She's better than me," Destiny said. "She's 14. She still has time." The studio was entirely silent. Steve Harvey heard this. He heard the whole sentence. He heard what was not said alongside what was said, the 14 years of a sibling who still had the ordinary time of childhood in front of her, because destiny was making sure she did. The implicit completion of the sentence that destiny had not said and was not going to say. She has time because I'm making sure she has time. She has time because I got up every morning and made the lunches and paid the bills and knocked on the door at night. She has time because I decided she would. Steve Harvey said, "How do you do it?" Destiny looked at him. She looked at the question the way she looked at all questions, practically, without sentiment, finding the actual answer rather than the available one. "My mom had a system," she said. "For everything. I grew up watching it. I know how it works." She paused. "So I run the system." Another pause. "And when something comes up that's not in the system, I figure it out." That's what she would have done. She paused. That's what she taught me to do actually without teaching it. By just doing it. Every day. For 15 years. Steve Harvey stood with that. Then he said, "Does anyone help you?" "Mrs. Reeves brings food," Destiny said. She looked at Mrs. Reeves. Something passed between them. Brief. Specific. The acknowledgement of 11 months of porches and meals left without knocking. "My grandmother is there when she can be." "My aunt came when?" She paused. "My aunt came." "Camille." She looked at Camille. Camille was crying openly and not trying to stop. "And Brianna," Destiny said. "Brianna helps." She looked at her sister. Brianna looked back at her. The expression on Brianna's face was the expression of a girl who had been watching her sister carry something for 11 months and had understood every day that it was heavy and had helped in every way she knew how and had not known how to say that and did not need to say it now. Steve Harvey looked at the audience. He looked at the production team at the side of the stage. He looked at the cameras. He said, "I need everyone in this room to understand what I am looking at." He turned back to Destiny. "You are 16 years old," he said. "Your mother died 11 months ago. Before that, your father died. You have 4 siblings, 8, 10, 12, 14 years old. You are the one getting them to school. You are the one making sure the lights are on. You are the one knocking on doors at night." He stopped. "You just won $20,000 on a game show. And the first thing you thought of, the first thing before anything for yourself, was school supplies and winter coats and the electricity bill." He stopped again. He was not managing his voice entirely. "Destiny, I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth." Destiny looked at him. "When do you cry?" he said. The room went completely still. Not quiet, completely still. The specific total stillness of a room that has just heard a question that it did not know it needed to hear, and that it now cannot stop hearing. Destiny looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. She looked at him with the level, direct, entirely unbothered gaze she had been looking at things with for 11 months. Then something in her face did something small. Something that was not quite visible and was entirely visible. Something that was the first unsealed thing she had shown in the entire taping. She said, "Sunday mornings. When they're all still asleep. Before I start breakfast." She paused. "I sit at the kitchen table and I cry for a little while." She paused again. "Then I start breakfast." Steve Harvey pressed his lips together. He looked at the floor for a moment. He looked back up. "Sunday mornings," he said. "Yes, at the kitchen table." "Yes, and then you start breakfast." "Yes," she said. "Because they're going to wake up. And they need breakfast." She paused. So Steve Harvey stood in the center of his stage and looked at this 16-year-old girl and he did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, very simply, "Destiny. What do you need?" "Not the siblings. Not the electricity. What do you need?" She looked at him. She thought about it. It was clear that she was genuinely thinking about it, that the question was not one she had prepared an answer for, because it was not a question anyone had asked her in 11 months. "I need the electricity not to be turned off," she said. "Because Jalen is afraid of the dark and he doesn't know about the bill, and I don't want him to wake up one morning and not have a light to turn on." Steve Harvey's jaw worked. "What else?" he said. "I need Andre's school shoes to last through the school year because I don't have the money for new ones until February." "What else?" She looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment. "I think that's it," she said. "I think if those things are okay, everything else is manageable." Steve Harvey turned to the audience. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, 16 years old. Both parents gone in 14 months. 4 siblings, Sunday mornings at the kitchen table, and everything else is manageable." He stopped. He breathed. "Everything else is manageable." He said it again, quietly, to himself rather than to the room, like he was trying to understand it. Then he turned back to Destiny. He said, "We're going to take care of the electricity bill. Today, before you leave this building." He paused. "And I want to do something else. I want to set up a fund through my foundation that will make sure those 4 kids have what they need for the next year. School supplies, clothes, whatever comes up." He paused. "Not forever, not charity, just a bridge, while you build the rest." Destiny looked at him. She said, "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," Steve Harvey said. "But I'm going to. And I'll tell you why." He looked at her steadily. "Because you are doing something that most grown adults could not do. You are doing it without asking for help. You are doing it correctly. Your siblings are fine, you said so. And I believe you, because you are the kind of person I believe." He stopped. "And you deserve a bridge. You deserve someone to hand you something and say, 'Here, this is for what you've been doing. This is for Sunday mornings at the kitchen table.'" He paused. "You've been doing it alone long enough." Destiny looked at him. She said, "Thank you." She said it simply, without the theater of gratitude that the moment might have invited. Just thank you, plain and direct, the way she said everything. Then she looked at Brianna. Brianna was not crying. She was looking at her sister with the expression of someone who is watching a person they love be seen for the first time by a room that did not previously understand what it was looking at. She had a small, private smile, the specific smile of someone who had known all along. Destiny looked at her. She gave her sister one nod. Brianna gave her one nod back. The audience, which had been very still, came to its feet. Steve Harvey's foundation made the call before the family left the studio. The electricity bill was paid that afternoon. Destiny received a confirmation on her phone at 4:30 in the car on the way back to the hotel, and she looked at it for a moment and then showed it to Frances without saying anything. Frances looked at it. Frances looked at Destiny. Frances said nothing either. She put her arm around her granddaughter, and they rode the rest of the way to the hotel in the specific companionable silence of 2 people who have just had something heavy taken from them and are still learning the new weight of without it. The foundation established a supplemental fund for the Williams children that would cover school costs, clothing, and household emergencies for a period of 1 year. Patricia Booker, the caseworker who had been managing the Williams family's case for 11 months, received the notification and called her supervisor, and her supervisor called her supervisor, and somewhere in the chain someone said, "This is what should have happened from the beginning. They're setting it up now." Patricia Booker said, "Better now than never." She called Destiny that evening. Destiny answered on the second ring. Patricia said, I heard about today. Destiny said, yes. How do you feel? A pause. Destiny thought about this honestly. Relieved, she said. About the electricity. Another pause. And kind of. She paused again. It's strange when people know. When people see it. I've been doing it without anyone really knowing what it was. Except the people in the house. And now, she paused. A lot of people know. Patricia said, is that okay? Destiny thought about it. Yes, she said. I think so. I think, she paused. Jalen's not going to wake up in the dark. That's the main thing. That's what I was worried about. Patricia said, Destiny. Can I ask you something? Yes, the Sunday mornings. The kitchen table. You said that on television. Yes, I didn't know about that. A brief pause. You didn't ask, Destiny said. She said it without accusation, just as a fact. Patricia sat with that for a moment. I'm asking now, she said. Is there anything else you need that nobody has asked you about? A long pause. The longest pause in the conversation. Then Destiny said, Sometimes I need someone to just be an adult. In the room. That I don't have to manage. That I can just be in the room with. Without being responsible for them. She paused. Mrs. Reeves is like that sometimes. When she comes in. She just sits at the kitchen table and I make her coffee and she doesn't need anything from me. She's just there. Patricia was quiet. I understand, she said. She began arranging through the casework system for a support volunteer to visit the Williams household twice a week, not to help with tasks, specifically, but to be present. An adult presence in the room that Destiny did not have to manage. She found a woman named Gloria who had been volunteering with the system for 7 years and who understood, immediately and completely, what was being asked of her. Gloria came the first time on a Tuesday. She sat at the kitchen table. She drank the coffee Destiny made. She did not offer help with anything. She was just there. Destiny sat across from her and did her homework. She came back on Thursday. She kept coming. The Family Feud episode aired 7 weeks after the taping, on a Thursday evening. By the following Saturday morning, it had been seen by more people than any episode the show had aired in 3 years. The clip that spread furthest and stayed longest was not the moment Steve Harvey learned she was 16. It was the moment after, the moment he asked her when she cried, and she said, Sunday mornings. At the kitchen table. Before I start breakfast. And then I start breakfast. People sent it to each other the way people send things that say something they could not have found words for themselves. Parents sent it to other parents. Social workers shared it in professional networks with their own notes attached. Teachers sent it to their colleagues with no notes at all. A woman in Atlanta named Renata had a daughter who was 17 and who, for reasons Renata had not fully understood, had been struggling in school for the past year. She watched the clip on a Saturday morning at her kitchen table. She watched Destiny say, Sunday mornings. At the kitchen table. Before I start breakfast. And then I start breakfast. She sat with that for a long time. Then she went to her daughter's room. She knocked. Her daughter said, Come in. Renata came in. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not have a plan for what to say. She said, I want to ask you something. And I want you to tell me the truth. Her daughter looked at her. Renata said, What are you carrying that I don't know about? Her daughter was quiet for a long moment. Then she told her. It took 40 minutes. Renata listened to all of it. She did not say, Why didn't you tell me? She did not say, I should have known. She said, Thank you for telling me. And then, we're going to figure this out. And then, you don't have to figure it out alone. Her daughter said, Okay. Renata sat with her for a while after that, not doing anything, just there. A high school counselor in Chicago named James showed the clip to his staff at their Monday morning meeting. He said, "I want to ask you something. How many of our students are doing a version of this? How many of them are carrying something this large and have not been asked about it because they seem to be managing?" The meeting ran an hour over its scheduled time. 3 students were identified that week who had been managing situations their teachers had not known about. All 3 received support that had not been available to them before because the need had not been visible. The need had not been visible because they were managing. Because they were managing the way Destiny managed, competently, quietly, without asking for help that nobody had thought to offer because the competence made the need invisible. Destiny went back to school the Monday after the taping. She sat in her first period class and opened her notebook and took notes on the lecture. She made Jalen's lunch at 6:30 and Andre's and Kezia's. She walked Jalen to the corner where the school bus stopped. She watched him get on. She went to school. She came home. She started dinner. She helped with homework. She checked the nightlight. On Sunday morning, she sat at the kitchen table at 5:50 in the dark. She sat there for a while. She started breakfast at 6:15. Jalen came down at 7 and said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning. Sit down." He sat down. She put a plate in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "Destiny, are you going to make pancakes on Sunday, like Dad used to?" She looked at him. She thought about Marcus's recipe. The buttermilk ratio. The thing he had kept in his head and not written down because he believed some things should stay in the head. She had watched him make them. She had watched him make them enough times to know the ratio by memory. Because that was how she paid attention, completely, practically, retaining what was useful. She said, "Yes." She said, "Next Sunday. I'll make them next Sunday. You remind me." Jalen said, "I'll remind you." He ate his breakfast. She watched him eat. Outside the kitchen window, the Memphis morning was doing what Memphis mornings did, arriving slowly, the light coming up in stages. The neighborhood still quiet, the day not yet requiring anything. She watched it come. She had time. She always had exactly enough time. That was the system. That was what Lynette had shown her. That was what she ran every day and would keep running, and would run until she did not need to anymore, until the 4 of them were old enough to run themselves. Until the system had done what systems do when they work correctly, produced the conditions for everyone in them to eventually not need the system anymore. She was 16 years old. She had time. She started the coffee.